In this video, I will explain how to calculate marginal product and average product. So let's jump right into an example. Let's say that we have some factory that produces widgets. The number of widgets that this factory can produce is dependent on their capital that they use and their labor that they use. So for this example, let's assume that the capital is fixed. So maybe that's like the number of machines that they have in the factory. Let's assume that it's always equal to 10. What we're going to do is we're going to change the number of units of labor, in other words, the number of employees at this factory. And we're going to see how changing the number of employees affects the total product, or the total number of widgets that we're able to produce in this factory. So for example, when we employ 0 workers, we're able to produce 0 widgets. But then when we employ 1 worker, we're able to produce a total product of 20 widgets. And when we employ 1 additional worker, so now we have 2 workers, we're able to produce 44 widgets, and so on. When we're given these values, so the number of employees and the total products produced, one interesting metric that we can calculate is the marginal product of labor. And what that tells us is that as we hire each additional employee, what is the change in our total product? So the formula to find this marginal product of labor is simply the change in the total product, so this triangle indicates change, divided by the change in the labor. So for example, let's consider this first box right here. When we go from 0 workers to 1 worker, we see that our total product changed from 0 units to 20 units. So the marginal product of labor, to calculate that, we simply take the new total product is 20 minus the old total product is 0, so we'll say 20 minus 0, divided by the change in the labor. We can see that now we have 1 employee and we used to have 0. So that would just be 1 minus 0. So we'll say 1 minus 0. So this comes out to 20 minus 0 is 20. 1 minus 0 is 1. So 20 divided by 1 is just 20. So the marginal product of labor is 20 for this row right here. So by adding 1 employee, we were able to increase our total product by 20. Now we can repeat this process in each of these rows to calculate the marginal product of labor. So let's consider this next row right here. We can see that when we went from 1 employee to 2 employees, our total product increased from 20 to 44. So our change in total product, that would be 44 minus 20, divided by our change in labor is simply 2 minus 1. So we have 2 minus 1. So we get 44 minus 20, that's 24, divided by 2 minus 1, that's 1. So 24 divided by 1 is 24. So in this case, by adding 1 additional employee, we were able to increase our total product by 24 units. And we can repeat this exact calculation for each of the remaining rows in this column. So here are the calculations for the marginal product of labor for all of the remaining rows. Now, along with the marginal product of labor, another metric we can calculate is the average product of labor. And that's simply the total product divided by the labor. So what this tells us is what is the average number of products produced per employee. So if we consider this first box right here, the average product of labor is simply the total product of 20 divided by the labor, which is 1. So we get 20 divided by 1, which is just 20. Then to calculate the average product of labor for the next row, we're simply going to take the total product, so 44, and divide it by the number of employees, or the number of units of labor, which is 2. So we get 44 divided by 2, which is 22. So this is telling us at this point, when we have 2 employees, our average product produced by each employee is 22 units. Then in the next row, we can take the total product of 69 and divide it by the labor of 3, so we get 69 divided by 3, and that comes out to 23. And we can repeat this calculation for each of the remaining rows. So here's what we get when we calculate the rest of those values in this column. Now, once we've calculated both the marginal product of labor and the average product of labor, something interesting that we can do is that we can plot these values on a graph. So here's what that looks like. Now, if we create a graph where the y-axis shows the total product and the x-axis shows our total units of labor, we can graph each combination of labor and total product from this table right here. And what we'll notice about the slope of this curve is that it starts out really steep, but then it starts to level off and it starts to get flatter and flatter as we go on. And what this is showing us is that there are diminishing marginal returns. So what that means is that as we're increasing our labor, so as we're increasing the number of employees that we have, we're still increasing our total product, but we're doing so at a decreasing rate. And we can see that reflected in the marginal product of labor column right here, where early on, as we add more employees, our marginal product of labor is increasing, but then as we hit a certain point, it starts to decrease and it starts to go down. And that's very common. So as we continue to add more employees, at some point the efficiency of the firm starts to decrease, and hiring each additional employee is not producing as much total product. And we can also see that reflected in the average product of labor column. So for example, when we had 3 employees, we were able to produce 23 units per employee. But once we were up to 6 employees, we were only producing just over 19 units per employee. So in other words, the efficiency of the firm started to decrease. So that is the idea behind marginal product of labor and average product of labor.